and welcome to Dotto Tech. Today's show is all about alternatives. Now, there's a lot of energy being spent getting the word out over Microsoft's new operating system and Office application. And there's a lot of innovative and new useful features in both Vista and Office 2007. But now would be a good time to step back and consider the alternatives. Now, one alternative is certainly the Mac, and y'all know where I stand on that front. But there's another alternative that you probably haven't considered. Because in the computer world, there are three main camps for operating system. You got your Windows, you got your Mac, and you got your Linux. That's right. You just heard the L word emanate from my lips. Linux. Now, I've not shown you Linux on this show for a variety of reasons. Mainly, in my opinion, Linux was for geeks only. But my mind has changed somewhat due to a variety of reasons, and the newest crop of Linux distributions has convinced me that it's time to show it to you. So over the next two shows, we are going to look at Linux for the average end user. I can hear the questions pouring in already. Steve, is it hard to do? Is it going to turn me into a geek? Can I do everything I need on my computer? What am I going to lose with Linux? What will I gain? Will women ever talk to me again? Well, these are the questions that we hope to answer for you today and in our next show. So first up, we need to set expectations for Linux. What do we need our computer for? Now, for the overwhelming majority of us, we need a computer that connects to the internet for email and web browsing and communications. But then we also need something to do a little bit of office work on, mainly word processing, perhaps some spreadsheets. Then we need calendar and address books, and we need a place that we can store, edit, and share our digital photos and music. Now, for most of us, that should pretty much cover our computer needs. Well, we're going to take a look at all of these tasks in Linux. Now, one of the most confusing aspects of Linux for the average person are the different Linux distributions that are available. A distribution is a bundle that includes Linux, which is the operating system itself, a desktop environment that rides over top of that, and then some applications. It's really no different than the Windows and Mac world, except there are more choices or versions available, especially in the user interface or the desktop area within Linux. Now, some of these Linux desktops emulate the Mac environment. Others feel more like Windows, and others are off in some weird place of all on their own. Now, there are dozens of companies that build different distributions of Linux for us to use. Now, these distributions or versions are designed for different groups of people. Now, some are for personal use on desktop or notebook computers, and other distributions are for server environments. Now, companies can't legally charge you for Linux itself because it has to be free, but they do charge you sometimes for documentation or support, and all of the companies would certainly appreciate it if you would send a little money their way to help support their effort. Today, we're going to look at two different distributions, Ubuntu and Mepis. I know, the names are a bit crazy, but the reason that I chose these two is because they are very user-friendly and very popular. Now, one of the great things about Linux, other than the fact it's free, is how efficiently it runs. We need a far less powerful computer once we make the switch, so that older PCs that you're, say, trying to pawn off on the kids or the in-laws run Linux perfectly. Now, I love this aspect of Linux, extending the life of a perfectly good computer that's too slow for Windows XP or Vista or even Mac OS X. This eyesore here is an old Pentium 3 that we'd put out to pasture. Nobody wanted to run it anymore. It was just too darn slow. So it was probably landfill bound. Well, we're going to have to find a new doorstop for the pantry door because this computer is going to run very nicely in Linux. So let's get started with the process. You got your computer that you want to convert to Linux. Most likely it has Windows running on it, an older version like 95, 98, or XP. Now, our first step towards Linux enlightenment is choosing a Linux distribution to call our own. We need to choose it, download it, and then test it on our hardware. So our journey to Linux begins on the internet. And let's start at Ubuntu at ubuntu.com. Now, the reason I like the Ubuntu site is, first of all, it's a very popular distribution of Linux. It's probably the most popular for the desktop environment. But beyond being a really good distribution, it also has really good information at the site about how to proceed with the whole process of converting a system over. And if I go into this download area here for the desktop at Ubuntu, I can scroll down and it will walk me through the process that I have to do to set up a test it and install disk for Ubuntu. Now, this is a very important process. As I walk through it, it tells me where I download the software from, and as you can see, it's very popular. These are all mirror sites that I can download the software from, how to choose a release. But the most important technical step that we have to face at this point is doing something called burning an ISO, because when we download the software, what we're downloading is something called a disk image. We can't just copy that onto a CD and then boot a computer from that CD, because we're going to use that software to actually boot and test our system. So we have to create something called a disk image, so we have a bootable CD, so that the computer can use the CD to actually start up. And that whole process is described here in How to Burn an ISO, and they do a really nice job of explaining it to us. And this works for any distribution of Linux that we download. We download it first, and then they even give us a free piece of software here called Info Recorder, and they show us all the screenshots and walk us through the process of actually burning a disk image. So I did this. I tested this with Ubuntu, and I tested actually several different distributions of Linux before the show. The one that we're actually going to use is this one called Mepis. Now, the reason I didn't start on this site right away is they actually don't do as good a job of explaining the whole process as they do at Ubuntu. Now, you might like Ubuntu better. I like Mepis better. It doesn't really matter. They're all distributions of Linux that will work just fine. Once the image is burned, once we've got the CD all prepared, then we're going to be able to boot the computer in Linux for the first time, which we do to test it out. And we're going to do that in just a few minutes. All 26 episodes of Dotto Tech Season 3 are available to borrow at participating libraries. Check our website for details.